What makes good or bad side content in our favorite or maybe least favorite games? That's what we're going to talk about today here on the Crubcast. My name's Kevin, also known as the Golden Bolt. I'm here with three of my fellow co-Crubbers, as always, including the returning famous Twitch streamer JTart9. Hi, Justin.
I'm back. They let me back on the podcast after my questionable methods.
How was the desert from Dune?
There's a lot of gooning.
That's... I almost want to
Welcome, new listeners.
I almost want to start the podcast over.
He didn't know what it was, by the way. I had to tell him.
Nico is in the desert as well.
Listeners.
Welcome, everybody, to the Crubcast. Justin's entire personality is the concept of gooning. We're also here with Moriarty. Hi, Em. How are you today?
You know, I was doing so well.
Yeah, we had a good pre-show. We were streaming this live on Twitch at twitch.tv/crub_official. And then Justin said that. So now I feel worse about my day. Nico,
You know what?
all hail buckets. How are you doing today? Nice dance.
What's up, gamers? Thanks.
Keep doing it.
No. You've introduced me. I'm no longer...
As a reminder, this is a video
spell.
podcast too, available at youtube.com/@crubofficial. If you want the audio version and you're watching in video form, go to crub.org to find it on every platform you could possibly want, and then some. If you're watching on any of those platforms, hit the like button or the subscribe button or the review button or the follow button. I don't really care. Just hit all of them and make sure you hit them an odd number of times so you stay following.
And if you do that, your computer starts to like light up and go crazy. It's pretty cool. It's like a slot machine.
Did you just... What?
Wow. Well,
know.
okay.
He's
We'll
on
unpack...
some shit today, dude.
Let's unpack that perhaps later.
Yeah, you know what? I agree with that. So we're talking about side content today, and I guess my first question is for you, Nico. What is side content?
Well, I'm glad you asked. Well, no, actually, this is a good question, right? Because I was thinking about this earlier today, and forgive me for brodying out for 2 seconds. Love him to death. But I was questioning why we don't have more side content in non-gaming media. Because, like, you could have side content in a book, in theory. Anyway, I digress.
That's called
side
books.
content.
That's called side books.
Side content.
That's called the
Side
spin-off
content.
Knuckles television show on Paramount Plus, streaming sometime this month, I think. I don't care.
Em was not expecting that. Okay. As if it's that outlandish.
This is the worst podcast we've ever done.
As if it's that outlandish.
I have my first thought is that one guy in the 1700s who wrote a book and didn't include any punctuation. And so the review was, hey, this book is good, but it needs punctuation. So he added 15 pages of periods at the end and commas and said, put them in where you want.
See,
that's side
okay, but
content
that's
in books.
I feel like that's not side content. I feel like that's paid to win. That's pay to win. But
Loot box mechanics in a book.
That's loot box in a book. But basically, right, like, so side content is something that deviates from the grander overarching narrative in order to either provide more hours of playtime or contribute to the world in some other way that maybe is on a less focused character.
Progressing
area.
the side content does not progress you in the main content broadly. There are games that do all that.
I would say if I were going to give it a definition, it would just be things that are not going to be progressing your main storyline in whatever way.
Yeah.
Sure. And they may even, I would even argue that some of them will kind of ancillarily do it, sort of like some of the Mass Effect side quests.
Absolutely.
That, improve
contribute.
the end story, but they're not part of the main thing. And I think that that's really the key thing to get here, because it could be anything from a mini game to a side mission to whatever, really. It could be Gwent.
Yeah, it could be Gwent. It could be the 14 different mini-game card games in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. It could be Pocket Racer in Yakuza / Like a Dragon. It could be all of these things and more. There are some games where side content is in some way required to get through the main thing. We're not going to go into the weeds on that, I don't think, just because that feels like a waste of time, and that just kind of becomes similar to that. It becomes a filler discussion, just as that is filler content at a point, if you need to do it to progress by the end of the game. Justin, In
The way you said that was a lot like Bentley.
I'm trying to think of how to ask him a question that doesn't go to gooning. And I don't.
He won't. He's serious.
boy.
He won't stop saying it. For the record, like this guy, you can't stop him from saying it.
The funny thing is they haven't talked to me in like a month.
Yeah,
And
there's a reason for that.
why.
The last
There's a reason for that.
thing we heard from you was that, and then you just come right back in swinging.
It's a good point. I think that was our last interaction. Was me giving you the definition.
Don't look it up. I promise.
Do not look it up. Yeah.
I think that the game that I've played the most recently that has very interesting side content is Persona. And Persona side content, in my opinion, are all the social links and all the things that you do in the day-to-day life of playing Persona outside of doing the dungeoning stuff.
That's an
Why
interesting
don't we
one.
start with Justin?
Because,
No, I'm just kidding.
Because I consider that, like, that is definitely side content.
It's definitely
and that
side content, but it's why you play the game, honestly.
Yeah, like it's almost in the same way that Yakuza then later took off for a similar reason. Having all of that slice of life stuff on the side and having those forgeable bonds with characters turns the side content into necessary content for not in a gatekeepy way, but maybe the truest enjoyment of those games. You don't really play Persona for the combat a lot of the time. And and also, side content enhances the combat in Persona because you have the team up moves.
It directly encourages you to play the main story of the game with more options and more abilities and more techniques and all that kind of stuff because you went out of your way and decided, I'm going to go hang out with my friends today. Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why I love Persona as much as I do, because the gameplay is very bog standard average. If it didn't, if you ask most Persona players why they play the game, it's not because of the gameplay. They play it because of the stories and the social links and the characters, even to the point where I believe there was a popularity poll of all the Persona characters from every Persona game.
And Teddy
was
the character
the character that won is the sun social link in Persona 3. Akinari, his name is. And he has an amazing story. I will not spoil any of it for you. Go and read it up yourself. But funnily enough, when I played through Mass Effect recently, it gave me a very similar sense of oh my god, that's another reason why I like Mass Effect so much, because you have all your loyalty missions and you're going out and interacting with your party. And I'm like, oh my god.
I like the idea of Justin sitting there with an Xbox controller and being like, this is just like Persona.
This is just like Persona.
While you're shooting aliens and watching a cigar man tell you what to do.
Yeah, when
Actually,
Martin...
it is kind of Persona, yeah.
That's what I'm telling you!
He turns his head and he looks straight into the camera. This is like Persona! Then he goes back to gaming.
Persona 5 is my favorite game. I can't wait to play it for the first time.
Oh my god.
No, they did a really cool thing. You know how YouTube's making games now?
No?
Well, they have a beta feature now where you can play games on YouTube. It's all browser-based stuff. And the first one was Persona games. 5. It was crazy. They got Persona 5 first.
I don't believe that.
Tell us a bit about the side content that you want to highlight first in video games and why it clicked with you or why it made you hate that game.
So the reason why this originally came up is because I've been playing Dave the Diver, and Dave the Diver is maybe just side content, but that side content is kind of all important to the overall story. And it's hard to say that anything that you do is not progressing yourself, but none of it's progressing you either. It's very kind of gray for me. But that's the one that I found to be very, very interesting to me lately. There is a lot of people, I think, I tweeted this, so this is a tweet I'm going to just kind of re-say, but there's a lot of people who think that, lots of content means hundreds of hours of grinding in the grass, killing the same Pokemon over and over again. Whereas Dave the Diver is actually lots of content, right? You've got the sushi the sushi bar where you're selling the sushi, and you've got all the mechanics there of delivering the sushi to the customers and filling their drinks and things like that. You've got running the actual sushi bar itself with the staff. You have the secondary branches that are showing up. You've got, Flappy Bird. You've got Sonic City Escape in there. You've got, just so much stuff. You've got racing and card games, and every time there's a Stardew section of the game where you're just like farming in Stardew.
I was even going to say that like Dave the Diver on that merit sounds to me in a similar vein to a Stardew, in that there's a main story to Stardew if you want to talk about like, fixing up the farm, but the whole game is secondary content to get to that conclusion. I think that maybe is the game that revitalized that sort of genre of work game.
Yeah.
Which is not a negative.
No.
Stardew's definitely the one, because before that you have Harvest Moon, but that never really caught on to quite an insane
Not
level.
as much as
It was
Stardew
very
now.
niche comparatively, yeah.
Yeah.
Nico, you're raising your hand, yes.
So, yeah. So I have a question for Moriarty, but also for the group. So it's clear that, something like Dave the Diver maybe differentiates itself by having a lot of variety in its content. Is that safe to say?
Yeah, it's hugely varied.
So what and where would you draw the line between something that is a lot of interesting and varied content and something that's just bloated? Because I do feel like that is a tough line to walk.
Final Fantasy VII Rebirth.
You think
that is where the line is
on the line?
It is absolutely at least on the line, and it probably crosses it a few times.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely come up a lot the past couple weeks, for sure.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, I think I have an answer to that question, in my mind at least. It's when the content is necessary. When you need to do it before you can progress with the game.
I see.
If it's not actually something that's on the side that you can just do if you so desire, then it's not bloat.
That's why I say Rebirth, because the thing that we had said back in 2020 to each other before Crub existed formally was that Final Fantasy VII Remake felt like the closest any non-Yakuza game had come to achieving a Yakuza feel.
Yeah.
And it's because, in part, Final Fantasy VII has always had a bunch of side content thrown in your face that made it sort of quirky and appealing, and it felt more fleshed out by having all this side content, because it was, during the PS1 era where having all these tiny little things might only take a little bit of time to produce, but it had a lasting impact on players because it felt like there was more to do besides save the world. 7 Remake captured that really well, and also captured Yakuza's unique quirkiness that no other game has really been able to capture, where it has these really stupid side quests that have a genuine ending that make you feel something, that make you feel more connected to the world and kind of enhance the experience of the rest of the game. A lot of the time in Yakuza, they are just one-offs, but they give you pieces into, Kiryu or Ichiban or any of the other protagonists, into their character. And you don't really get that with Final Fantasy. It's more you get into the world of Midgar, which then later in the plot becomes important because plot things happen.
As soon as Justin said what he said, it took me to Yakuza, because a lot of that stuff is not necessary, but it does give you, and this is a big point for me, I think, is it gives you a good reward, right? So like whether that reward is a good side story, little like nuggets of information about the character, whether it's an actual in-game reward like a weapon or a move, or in Yakuza's case like a heat move, things like that, right? Like I think those things in Yakuza the rewards tend to match the storyline, and I think that's part of where like bloat would be for me, is like as soon as you start getting like just things that you can do and there's like no real like reward or implication for it, and to Justin's point, it's maybe a little mandatory, or maybe like it just gives you a one-off skill or something you need to complete the game. So.
Mandatory makes it not side content, in my opinion.
And that's why go ahead.
Soft mandatory.
Well, no, I think there's a lot of games that do make it mandatory, right? You have to do this thing. And even in Dave, it is mandatory to complete the story, but it's not mandatory to continue playing and enjoying it and getting better and improving and all that kind of stuff. if you are required at any point to complete a certain number of objectives or something like that, then I think that becomes sort of an abdication of content as opposed to side content, right? Like they're abdicating their role of providing you a tightly knit sort of linear main story in order to say, well, just go do this thing and now you're filling out the game.
And that jumps me to Rebirth. If
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. I don't want to cut you off too hard there, but I'm going to. So the thing with Rebirth is that there are 4 or 5 straight chapters that are effectively side content. There's a chapter where you are putting together a parade dance, which is really funny, and there's actually some level of characterization to it because you build a connection with these Shinra soldiers, and you're like, hey, they're the enemy, but they're still cool. There's an element of that that's kind of necessary to a plot like this where you're fighting fascists. And so there's that. Then after that, you get on a boat and you play a card game for an hour and a half. Then after that, and mind you, there's like one or 2 sections of combat encounter during those chapters in between. Like it's like do the parade, a little bit of combat, do the boat, little bit of combat. You get to the beach, and now here's a wide open area where you do a bunch of side content, including a little shooting gallery game and more card games, and finding all of the segues that are in. I mean, that's more of a side mission itself, but there's all these little side things that you need to do to then get beach outfits to be able to get onto the beach to progress the story again. Then after that, there's a wide open world area that you can at least skip, and then there's more story. And there's multiple sections of this happening back to back to back to back, to the point that from anywhere from chapter 4-ish up through much later in the game, most of the game in the middle is all characterization and side stuff, which is important because being able to further build out this party that we've known for 25 years is a good thing. But they kind of forget about the story for a lot of the time, because as soon as you're up the mountain, you go and do more side content because now you're in minigame theme park, and there's more of that. And it just continues more and more and more of this side content that is forced upon you to progress the story. And like you were saying, and that's the point where it becomes maybe, I think you said, an abdication of content rather than a breadth of content. And that's kind of what I feel about 7 Rebirth, because the open world sections that do exist, there's only a handful of things to do in them. They're kind of obligatory. They're kind of just sculpted Unreal Engine, if you didn't know any better, procedurally generated worlds, sort of like how Forspoken was, actually. And there's like, here's a couple enemies that are sprinkled around that aren't just the ones where you do side questy things to do, then go and fight them. And it's part of what's made me feel so conflicted on the game, because all those character moments do make up for the fact that there's not a lot of game in the middle, or there's too much of different game in the middle, perhaps. And that's why I point to that one, because I'm still not sure how I feel about that game weeks after finishing it. Because I look at it and I'm like, I don't know how I feel about this one compared to 7 Remake, and I think that's also maybe how I felt about 7 Remake mostly, looking back. But for different reasons.
I have noticed that you've been rather conflicted on that, I feel like. I don't think things tend to stick with you as much when you're able to just make up your mind about it like right away.
Yeah, and I've been thinking on it for a while, and a lot of that's related to story things, a lot of that's related to side things. It's just that whole game in general is bold in what it attempts to do, and I think the big tripping point that I have is that it loses the plot for a lot of time in the middle to make you do all these side things again and again. And I think that hurts the game, because you can tell there's a point in the game where they're like, oh yeah, story, let's get back to that. And then it's you ramp through to the end, and then there's more side stuff in the middle anyway.
Gotcha.
And is it
a good game? Like, is it worth buying? Is it worth playing? Like,
I don't know that we want to get too much into the weeds on Final Fantasy.
No, I guess.
Final Fantasy VII,
I guess not.
The main reason I mention it is because for me, it's the current perfect example of side content being too much because, again, to go back to that PS1 era where it was easy to make these sorts of things because it only took maybe a little bit of time and resources. Here, these all have to be fleshed out. These all have to be fleshed out much in the way, like I've said this before, with one of the early Ratchet and Clank games, they talked about how making the arena or making the races, you needed close to the amount of effort to make a whole new game, obviously with a smaller subset of team. Yeah. But the amount of, you need to make it polished. You can't make side content that's just half-assed. You need to make it as high of quality as the main game if you're going to put it in that kind of game. And so when you're putting, high-res 4K assets, debatably, into this side content where you're doing the bike racing from 7 again, but now in VR, because that's one of the mini games. Like, that takes a lot of time to produce, and that's one of the things that Yakuza does so well, is that it reuses the base overworld so much to give ample resources to make that side content without breaking the bank or going insane. And I think that this, there's so much effort that went into all this stuff that I understand why they force it upon you. I just think that maybe it was a mistake to have done so, because for a lot of the game, it feels like a game to me that's aping Yakuza rather than successfully being the first game that actually does it that's not Yakuza, Right.
Mm-hmm. I see what you're saying.
Because there's a reason why they always go back to Kamurocho.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to have to rebuild a whole new area, and the one time when they did decide to build a whole new area was when they decided to turn the combat away from being super, it has to work on a physics engine and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, they can just animate it.
There were secondary towns in a lot of the Yakuza games that they did come back to. They usually created Sotenburi, Okinawa. There were other ones that were mostly small. And then, like you said, when they were like, okay, we have to do something new, they made Yokohama, and it was very, not bland, but it didn't have a lot to do in Yakuza 7. It was Lost Judgment that then added a bunch of side content to it to further flesh out the parts of the world they didn't really use in 7. And then
when these games take 12 years to produce and $200 million, it kind of makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
To maybe look at some of the positives, though, I have two things I want to talk about. One that I think Nico and you, Kevin, are going to have a whole lot to talk about, so I'll mention it last. But first, games that maybe follow the CD Projekt Red philosophy with The Witcher and Cyberpunk of having side quests that are building out the entire world, right? And that's exclusively what they do, is their world building. But they also provide you with some material reward in the game, right? So if you do your Witcher game or your Cyberpunk stuff, and you're doing all the side quests, those side quests are going to give you better weapons, more money, more things like that. They're entirely optional, of course. You don't have to go and drive around a limousine in Cyberpunk. You don't have to do that. You don't have to go and kill the hag in The Witcher. You don't have to do that. And doing that arguably doesn't help your character in any way outside of some mostly meaningless experience, right? And some money and maybe, a cool gun or whatever. But they're much more optional in the way that, if you don't do them, you'll still have a very good experience. And I think that maybe that's my favorite kind of optional experience, side quests.
Yeah, no, I always attribute that to kind of like the early, I shouldn't say early, the Fallout 3 and New Vegas-y sort of side content.
Yeah, or I guess Fallout 2, really, the Black Isle kind of path of having. Yeah.
I'm thinking more so in the same vein as like a modern open world game.
Yeah, that's how Yakuza feels to me, to be honest with you. All the side content in Yakuza feels that way for me. Like, it feels like you can have a perfectly excellent experience without doing a lot of it, but your experience will just be better doing it. So I like that.
Yeah, and it's with Yakuza, it's also just the dichotomy of having this super serious melodramatic story and then having the most batshit side content you can possibly imagine, where Kiryu turns around and takes a picture on his cell phone of a grandma doing a front flip because she saw a billboard and got horny, and hit a car and then a flip, and then you take a picture
and then Majima shows
tweet
up.
It out. Like, that's a whole thing, and yeah. But no, I really enjoy that kind of side content too, because that's the kind that I think keeps me. That's the kind that I actually find myself doing. And it's funny I say that because I think of, you mentioned Witcher. I also think Gwent first because I haven't played Witcher because I know that it'll eat my life. So I've avoided it. And I think Gwent, and then I think Rebirth has a similar card game where they do force you a lot of the time, or at least they make it very clear, you're going to play this a lot. So we got our money's worth out of it, which I kind of respect, because I just thought about Horizon Forbidden West, which has a little chess game that is entirely optional outside of, I think maybe they maybe force it upon you once in the tutorial area. And even for the Platinum Trophy, all you need to do is win 3 games. Or maybe 5 games. And you can play the tutorial 5 times, and it counts. I think. It's been a couple years. I forget, so forgive me. But I think of the amount of effort that went into that kind of side content that someone will appreciate, and how it's just never going to get played by almost anybody.
Yeah.
And that makes me kind of sad. But also,
I'm okay with that. I would rather have these sort of games that I'm experiencing. So I don't replay games very frequently, especially RPGs, right? Like, you finish Baldur's Gate 3, I'm never going to create another character. It's just never going to happen.
Crub Baldur's Gate 3 coming next month.
Yep.
It's not. I'm just calling his bluff.
I play through my gameplay, and I go and I experience my story. And once my story is done, I never experience it again. Mm-hmm. And that's because, I feel like it's very final and it's mine. And I had my experience and I know what my experience is. And I don't need to see every experience because I've experienced something that's mine and mine alone. And so I really appreciate these sort of side experiences that not everybody has, where if you go through the game, and I think Baldur's Gate's a really good example there specifically for this, because there's a whole lot of things that happen in that game that do not happen to most people, right? Yeah. Like, you are not going through your average gameplay experience unless you're following a walkthrough, because everything you change and touch, you're getting that butterfly effect. And I think that's almost kind of the beautiful aspect of playing games, is that sort of unique and individual experience that you have.
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. I think I've talked about, this is not a side content game, but I've talked about 13 Sentinels before, where there is almost zero chance, unless you follow a guide, that your playthrough will be the exact same as anybody else's, because you choose each of the protagonists and you go through each of their stories in like little chapters, and beating one person's one chapter might unlock the other character's first chapter. And so whatever order you start the game in, there's so many permutations you can go to that it's not infinite, but it's pretty damn close as far as gaming is concerned. Mm-hmm. And you have to do all that stuff is the thing. Like, that's not
meaning to check that game out.
One of the things that was popping up in my head, and this is maybe a real deep cut because I don't think anybody here is going to know it, is the Pazak card game from the Old Republic.
Knights
of the Old Republic games.
Yeah.
That was something that eventually became popular enough that people were making their own versions of it outside of the game. And I think that's really fascinating when you're able to do that, just kind of as a side thing. So the other game that I was thinking of that I think is something that we'll have some talking or conversation about with regards to side content specifically, and I think maybe does it in, I don't know, one of the most unique ways is Helldivers, because there is most of your mission is side content. Now, is it story content? Obviously not, right? But there is no reason outside of your core objectives to go and do these things except for, some little pieces of experience. Arguably, you are risking failing your mission by doing side missions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, I like the way they do it, where it's like, you can go do this. We give you the time, we give you the resources, but it's not your primary thing, and you totally don't have to. But it'd be really cool if you did, and you'll have a lot of fun if you do.
It's very reminiscent to me of Risk of Rain, where if the more time you spend doing side content, and in Risk of Rain it's more outright, where the more time you spend, the harder the game is progressively getting. I don't know or think it's quite that way in Helldivers necessarily.
The longer you're out, it does. It gets more difficult.
Okay, so then it's straight up Risk of Rain in that regard. And I think that that's one of the coolest risk-reward systems that games can have currently. And I'll give a hot take that can be used if someone wants to cut this out for the preview of this episode. I think outside of story, Helldivers is what Starfield should have been.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Like if you're talking about a game where the goal is to explore every single planet and have the freedom to do so, having you be thrown onto these, as far as I know, procedurally generated level maps, and giving you this chunk of it, because given now Starfield, you can do almost all of a lot of planets at the very least, but why would you? There's nothing to do there. It took me a while when playing Helldivers for the first time. For some reason, my gamer brain didn't turn on. I didn't see the compass on the top of your screen, so I didn't see the little points of interest coming up, and I was like, well, where do I go? I'd pull up my minimap, and I'd be confused because, I'm playing the game for the first or second time. And then I saw the compass, and I was like, oh, absolutely, I'm going to do all this side stuff because I want to see what's in store, even if it's just saluting a door to open some credits or whatever.
Yeah.
It's for democracy, of course.
It's for democracy.
It's for democracy.
And the more that I've played that game, the more that I'm like, man, it's wild that this came out, 8 months after Starfield, and it unintentionally apes everything that Starfield kind of wanted to be, but never was ever going to come close to being.
Agree strongly.
Yeah, and it does it while also aping Warhammer 40K and doing its anti-fascism satire better than 40K ever did.
Yeah. It is.
I think my favorite,
such a good game.
Just to digress for 2 seconds, I think my favorite thing about Helldivers is that everyone who has compared it to Starship Troopers has never seen Starship Troopers, so I'm not going to make that comparison because I've never seen that movie either.
It is 100% Starship Troopers. There's no question. The thing is that ironically, Starship Troopers is too subtle about its incredibly satirical points, so people take it and think that it is a very pro-military movie.
I see.
When it is very much not.
Yeah. Haven't later Starship Troopers properties then unintentionally leaned into the fact that they missed that it was satire?
Yeah, the later ones completely miss the satire.
Yeah.
The first one is satire. I remember there's a quote from the director, and I'm going to butcher it because I don't remember it perfectly, but it was something like, I know one day people are going to watch this and think it's serious.
It's like Springsteen, where people always take Born in the USA and think it's think it's a pro-war song.
Oh my God, dude,
patriotic song, yeah.
No, I've been at many sporting events where they've just done that and they continue to do it.
It's great.
Is what it is.
I do see a comment in our Twitch chat, which of course we do record these live, which says, isn't the original book just not satire at all? And I should say that, that is part of why Paul Verhoeven's change of Starship Troopers is so brilliant. The original book, which is perfectly fine, right, is about soldiers who are in like a mech outfit. They are a starship to themselves, and therefore they are Starship Troopers. And boy, the Starship Troopers movie just doesn't take anything from that at all. They throw it all aside to make some of the most biting and interesting anti-war, anti-military, anti-fascism satire maybe ever. And I think it's really, really funny when people are just not seeing it at all, because it's right there. In fact, there is a significant hinting, not quite subtle, but subtle enough hints in the movie that actually we as humans started the war, and maybe the whole asteroid that sets the movie into play is a false flag. It's so good. It's so good.
That's very similar to in Helldivers, to bring it back.
That's what I'm saying. It comes right into Helldivers, and that's why there is no question that Helldivers is a Starship Troopers homage.
Which, as much as I want to watch that movie, I am deathly afraid of bugs.
Well, they all get killed.
It's not. It's more so like the. Sorry, I saw the scene.
Do you know if the writer, the author of the book, was pro or anti the movie? Do you know that?
I have no idea. I think he was very dead.
Yeah, it sounds like he was dead.
Very dead.
Because my next jump was going to be going back to The Witcher, where the Witcher writer
doesn't like the games, right?
Doesn't like the games, and then the Metro writer for Metro 2033.
Oh, you're right. So Sapkowski, the guy who wrote the Witcher books, he thinks of it as like a horrific, sin of a game. It's terrible. It's not my Geralt.
Yeah.
Which is funny because he once said that all of the Witcher games should be paying him a lot more money because they wouldn't be popular if not for his books. And the funny part is nobody was reading the books before they played the games.
Yeah, like the games led to a huge uptick in book sales. And the writer, the author of Metro 2033, that series, has replied to that a couple times and said outright to like to the Witcher guy, through the internet ether, take the popularity, it's okay that they changed things. It's going to make your shit so much better because it did for me.
Yeah.
And it's I think fascinating.
That's a question about adaptation, right? Like, you should be making changes. And I think we've talked about it a few times, but there's a book series called Foundation by Isaac Asimov, and they have recently turned it into a show on Apple. And I wouldn't say it's necessarily great, but it's fine. More importantly, though, is that they adapted it very smartly with regards to the Emperor. And I keep bringing this up, so maybe you've heard this before, and I apologize if you have. But I'll quickly summarize it, which is that there is in the book several emperors because the book takes place over 800 years. And it is constantly jumping time. And so in the book, you can read Emperor so-and-so and you go, oh, okay, I know who that is. But that doesn't really translate to visual understanding. You can't look at a guy and go, oh, I immediately understand that this is the Emperor and that this is taking place in such time period. So what they did is they made the Emperor a clone. And so every time you see the same actor, he is always the Emperor, even if it is, 500 years later. And it's a type of shorthand that I think changes the story in the same way that a lot of the Witcher changes do change the story. Mm-hmm. It alters it, and semi-materially too, because now you have to, talk about how does this work and why is this important and why does he do these things? And so you are introducing changes to the story that maybe the original, author would not appreciate. However, it is a very smart adaptation, and those changes do help make the adaptation better than it would be otherwise. Yeah,
and at a point, not to go death of the author, but what you think about the property at a point doesn't matter anymore, because if it's being adapted, A, you're either getting a paycheck where your estate is because you're dead, and B, it's no longer your property alone.
Yeah. I'm a big believer in death of the author. I personally believe that the moment that you release that thing, it doesn't matter what you think anymore because it's not yours anymore. You can tell me how you originally felt when you were writing this, what your intentions were. But if I think, this character is gay or that character is black, that's what it is. And it doesn't really matter what you say to me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. 100%.
I don't know where I stand on that. I've been actually, this is one of those issues where I really need to continue thinking about it. I don't know where I stand on it.
Well, I mean,
but I do know where I stand on the side content of Red Dead Redemption 2.
I really thought you were going to say, this is what I think about Freddy Fazbear.
Freddy Fazbear. I did say it maybe with that tonality. I couldn't think of a good segue, but I want to talk about bad side content because I think that something like a Red Dead Redemption.
Before you do, one more thing on good side content, very briefly. There's a lot of good side content at patreon.com/Crub, as little as $5 a month. I thought that's where you were going, so I was going to let you do it. And then you said Red Dead 2.
I considered you to have gotten the plugs out of the way at the very first 5-minute mark, so I wasn't worried about it.
I was waiting for the Patreon one, and then I forgot. Anyway, patreon.com/Crub, a lot of awesome side content there. We go on little side casts fairly frequently, talking about things like every episode of the Pokemon anime, which Justin, Mykonos fan, and I are going to be doing again later this week for another bunch of episodes. We also do Nico talking about and recommending music to the rest of the co-Crubbers and talking about what their opinions are of it and how the author's opinion no longer matters because
making a comeback soon.
Yeah,
Trav's episode on its way out.
Bad side content, Red Dead, go.
Bad side content, Red Dead. Man, so I just think that you know, and I know that M has talked a lot about realism in games. Maybe offline, maybe on the podcast. I don't know.
First,
but I think that
before you get into this, have you played Red Dead 2?
who cares? So that's not relevant. That's not relevant.
Okay.
The point being that first of all, why would you ask that? Second
No,
of all,
I know why he asked that, because I had the same thought, because I know where this is going.
Yeah,
No. Well, no. Because there are facts that I know about the game that I know are things that I would find annoying when I'm playing it, right? Which is that
The irony that I am, for our audio listeners who can't see me, of course, I am in the exact same pose as you, Kevin.
Justin, triple up.
I can do that.
yeah.
Okay,
So-
I'm sorry. Please go ahead, Nico. Tell me about Red Dead.
The game you haven't played. Kind of like Sean, I'm in Kingdom Hearts.
Yeah, kind of like Sean in Kingdom Hearts.
Continue.
No. All right. So, when you put so much realism into a game, that the side content then becomes relatively mandatory if you want your character to look or, you know, in some cases act how you would in sort of an RPG scenario, right? Or in a scenario where you're trying to like self-insert to like a character. You know, when you talk about things like your haircut or things like the way that your character is like sort of perceived in the world, right? In that game, I know for a fact, regardless of whether I've played it or not, that you have to take a bath regularly or characters will be off-put
Never
by
once took
you.
a bath in my game.
And I know for a fact that for your hair just and your beard just grow. And in order to like get the haircut and beard style you want, you have to like drink a bunch of hair tonic or whatever, or you have to just wait it out. And I feel like
Never once
mechanics
engaged with that mechanic.
I feel like, well, okay, yeah, but you don't spend time in your character customizer the way that I always have, right? Like, it's whenever I play a game like a GTA or a game, not a GTA, a game like a Fallout, right? Like, again, I never got far
Red
in
Dead
Fallout
is a
3.
game
I
like a
just
GTA,
kept,
though.
okay, but that's the thing. I always
a
got
set-
annoyed at GTA. Like, I got annoyed at the, like, the system where you had to pick your parents and you don't customize your character. I digress. That's not relevant. The thing is, in GTA, like, I would make Michael and Franklin and Trevor look how I wanted them to, and that was important to me. And I'm sure it's important to other people, even though it might not be important to you, Kevin, you, Moriarty, or you, Justin.
It's
But
not that
that
it's
said-
not important to me. It's that if we're going to talk about the creator's intent, the intent was that you have to keep up with things if you want them to look a certain way. The intent was, for better or worse, for that to be a Wild West simulator. And
Yeah, but it's like-
I think that that's antithetical to a lot of the story beats of that game. But the thing about it is, it doesn't take any effort at all to get your character to the point that you're complaining about. If you want your
Just
character to
seems
have
like-
a specific length of beard, it's going to take several in-game days for it to change to the next length anyway.
It just
you're wearing a
seems
hat.
to me...
You're always wearing a hat.
It just seems to me like it's sort of a weird thing to do. Like, it seems like an unnecessary thing to make it, like, with no option to turn that off. Or, like, you know, I mean, and maybe that's just not the game for me. That can be the answer. I'm okay with that.
That's
Like,
none of that side
It's
content
just not...
is my
It is side content because it's not the main game. You can just let it go. So it is side content.
That's
It's
a-
how you want
that-
to play the game. It's like
that's
how you want to
appearances. It's not
interface
about-
with the world.
It's not about how you want to engage with the game. It's how you want your character to look.
I think that's interesting because I can definitely see Nico's point of view here, where he is thinking of that sort of, you know, what would you call that, fashion quest, right?
Yeah, coloring your experience.
Yeah, because, like, I mean, you don't need to interact with it at all to go through any of the games. So I guess, in a sense, it is the most side content of side content, where it does not need to be interfaced with it in the slightest.
But I can
Not a
definitely
single
see
soul
how,
is going to notice it, though. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I think some people would, obviously, because Nico does, right?
No,
Yeah,
but I'm saying
important
over
to
the
me.
course of a game, unless they specifically had marketed this as a thing, it would have taken months for people to realize it was a thing because it's slow.
maybe. I think there is a point to Nico here. I think it's not being presented particularly well, but I think Nico has a good point,
Thanks.
which is the idea that, some of these kind of content, I don't agree with Nico's idea that you should be able to turn it off. But
I didn't, and I don't mean that, right? Like, I think I just said that. I was backed into a corner there.
I do understand the idea of viewing sort of fashion questing as being its own side minigame. And I think some people very much do, especially in like a RuneScape, right? Where, or any of the Korean MMOs, right, where you can spend actual days in a character creator, where that is a type of content, and that's a reason why people come and play the games. Not everybody, right? Some people are certainly there because they want to kill a dragon, but other people are there because they want feathers in their hair.
I think my point is more that you're playing a game that's not GTA like it's GTA, but I've never once heard you complain about Kiryu not being able to change his outfit until post-game. Like,
well, that's different, though. That's a story where Kiryu's look is sort of irrelevant.
Do you know what Red Dead 2 story is?
Who cares? Yeah. No. I think the thing for me is more the bathing. It's the bathing that's like the...
I never once bathed. I beat that game.
Okay, sure. But like, it's not...
I think I 100%'ed that game.
That doesn't change the fact that it's a mechanic that if you don't bathe, the characters in the town will be worse.
Not a single time has anyone said that to me.
Look it up. Google it.
I know it exists, but
like, I promise
do
you
you
it's
understand
a thing.
what I'm saying, Nico? I did nearly everything in that game, and not once did a character comment on my character's lack of bathing.
Okay, well, convenience sample doesn't mean it doesn't exist. The point is the principle, not the fact that it happens in this game. You give the game up in 10 minutes anyway. You're complaining about a thing you would never engage with.
Whoa.
Maybe don't be,
Maybe we unmute.
What are we doing here? Yeah.
Like what I'm saying here is it's a thing you would never experience. You only know it's a thing because of the internet. You're complaining about a thing you would never have experienced.
I'm just saying in principle. I'm just saying it's the principle of it. I don't like the principle of like that being something that affects the game. And it's side content. Again, to you, it didn't affect your playing of the story. And to most, it might not. But the idea that can happen is just like weird to me. I feel like that's a weird line. I feel like that's a line.
Only time
it's an artistic choice, though.
There's that. But over the course of 40 plus hours with the game, it never came up because you're going to fall into water at some point, and that counts as bathing. If you go swimming, they count that as bathing.
Interesting.
By virtue of playing the damn game, you're never your sim is more likely to run into it in The Sims.
Your sim,
because it takes 10 minutes versus however many hours I put into Red Dead 2. I don't even like that game. I think that game's a piece of shit a lot of the time. But this is a bad argument.
Agree.
This is a bad argument.
Yeah, I was gonna say you guys were defending it quite a lot, but no, it's
I wouldn't say this is defending it, right? Like I absolutely think that Red Dead 2 is a piece of trash.
I
really don't like it.
I liked my experience with the very few specific moments of that story, and none of them mattered because it was such a casualified GTA pilled nightmare of a game, which is why this of all things being the thing to complain about is fascinating because it's a thing like that
it's one example. It's one example of a thing that I would like to not snowball out of hand.
Sure, I agree with you. We talked about this last week on the podcast too, with The Last of Us and with Red Dead, with like the amount of effort that goes into making your eyes dilate when you go out in the sun and having the horse balls shrink in the snow. I think that's all stupid stuff that shouldn't exist in AAA video games because it's a waste of development resources.
Right.
I agree with you.
I have to believe that like when we think about something like that, right? How many millions of dollars have been given away to things that eventually just become Kotaku headline? Well, not anymore, but would become Kotaku headlines about the balls shrink in the snow.
And that's kind of what I was getting at with like the bathing thing is we would never know it was a thing unless they specifically put it out there in press materials. Like that's a thing that Rockstar sent out to people.
And we have the hindsight of it now. I would not have complained about it during and even then I'm not even complaining about it. I'm setting it out as a hypothetical like example of a larger concept. I didn't mean to like talk about this game specifically, hence why I don't think it's important that I play it. The concept of just like
fashion
stuff
quest
like
is
fashion
the term
questing
you're looking for.
Being mandatory in some way or another way is like or dictated by like some kind of engineering. It's just like
I think the context matters. I think like I agree with you in the principle that a game like a GTA maybe doesn't need that sort of mechanic because it doesn't affect gameplay in any direct way. Like, it's not a super in-depth hardcore simulator where you need to bathe so you don't get infections. That's a different kind of game.
Yeah.
That's a
different thing.
That's
a different thing.
There's been a big consistent dissonance with Red Dead 2 and how it handles trying to be a Western simulator and also being the most baby GTA mechanics of any game. Horse insurance is the biggest example of that concept.
Yeah.
Like,
I should be complaining about that. That's weird.
Yeah.
Like annoying.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's even weirder. I feel like that's worse. And actually a better example of what
we
I'm
will
talking
eventually
about.
talk about Red Dead 2. I promise you there's going to be a Red Dead 2, inevitably a Red Dead 2 podcast.
I refuse to play that game again.
It's going to happen. We're not going to play it. We're going to talk about it, and we're going to just talk about how bad it is, because I think there needs to be a time where somebody just tears down how that game is not very good. I don't think we should go too much in depth onto this, because it's clear that Nico is not necessarily prepared to have the arguments that you're having because he hasn't played the game.
Yeah, I wasn't here, and I wasn't even trying to argue anything. I was just giving it as a hypothetical example of like
with regards to wanting your character to look certain ways. I think that is a valid thing, right? Some people do want that outside of Red Dead, obviously. Yeah. And I think that the term that you're looking for there really is fashion questing, and I think
questing.
Pretty sure that comes from EverQuest.
Yeah.
Because people will, they'll play the game and then they'll wear, and we see this in a lot of RPGs, right? I think if you tweeted this out, you would find that a lot of people agree that they will wear something that looks good even if it doesn't have the best stats. And that, that's something that people want. So I think there's certainly kind of an interesting perspective that is side content, because I wouldn't have originally said it. But even with just a few seconds of thought, it's like, that is definitely.
That's what I'm getting at.
There's a reason why there's a reason why a lot of games like Monster Hunter and Xenoblade have an option to have a cosmetic armor set and an armor set of what you're actually what your stats are.
Yeah, like a transmogrified set. Yeah,
it's one of the things that Neo does that the Souls games do not. The Souls games have stats tied to Fashion Souls, but in Neo you can swap abilities with like armor and stuff. So, yeah, which is side content by definition.
Yeah,
by definition, it is. I think an interesting point of view there. With regards to just kind of like side content being good or bad, because I know we've kind of meandered here. Boy, if you're still here listening to this, you have gone on a journey.
You've gone on a lot of side quests.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie.
You've gone on a lot of side quests.
I'm not going to lie. I'm not proud of this one, fellas.
Oh, no, this was great. This was fun. Just what a crazy journey. You can see that this here is maybe the closest that our discussion has ever gotten to what our actual discussions are like.
Welcome to True Crub.
This is what it's actually like when we're sitting in a chat.
True Crub. We should do True Crime.
True crime.
No. True Crub.
Yeah, we do.
No.
We read True Crime, like a cold read where one of us reads True Crime and then everyone reacts to it. True Crub.
No,
I feel
but can I be the one who reads?
Yeah, only if Justin's the goon killer.
Okay.
I'm the goon killer.
Yeah, the goon strangler.
Yeah,
I could maybe get into that kind of. What was the guy's name? Cryotic. I could get into that cryonic voices kind of thing.
Yeah, but we have voice mods, so we could just do that.
Yeah, wait, can you say...
Don't do it.
Good at things.
Ooh, hit him with the swear jar. Got him. We waited 55 minutes into this episode to get that.
Folks, I will say this. For the past, as we're saying, this is the closest we get to like our real conversations. You can find conversations like this in the pre and post show streamed exclusively on twitch.tv/Crub_official.
Damn right. Justin, talk more about side content. Say words.
Yeah, what's up, dude?
I have some side content to bring up to the chat to the call rather, if everybody's ready for it, and that is our Patreon question of the week.
Yeah, fair. Yeah, actually valid.
Our side content for this week of the Patreon question of the week comes from TheCrazyEven, and he asks, what is a game that has a moment or a mechanic that made you drop it then and there, and did you ever pick it back up again? I have one that I would actually like to talk about personally, and that is Xenoblade Chronicles X. The way that game operates its main story is you have to do a bunch of side quests to get to it.
Yeah.
And I didn't like that. So when I got to a certain part of the story where it was like, okay, now you have to do 10 side quests before you can progress with the main story, I was like, no. And I left.
That is the closest I think I've ever found to a single player MMO.
Yeah.
Like it is exceptional how much that game takes from MMO design from a company that's never made one. And they made one there with like 60 side characters that all have their own side stories. There's not really a main quest in Xenoblade X. Like there is, but it's not why you're playing the game. You're playing it for the side characters' stories and for the 40 hours of gameplay before you get the mech on which the cover is based.
Yeah. It's just one of those things where I was like,
Yeah.
man, I really wanted to fly around in the mech, and you don't get it until 40 hours into the game.
It's
And then
a
it was
lot.
like, do 10 side quests. And it was like, oh, no.
Plus, that game's on Wii U, and that's side content by itself.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just having to play on a gamepad.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
The Wii U being side content is crazy.
Em, what about you? I have a Wii U. I'm one of the 5 owners, so I can say that.
Me too.
What about you, Em? What's the game that you think of first with concept of a game or side content that turned you off or mechanic?
Immediately, it's the Far Cry series. We talked a little bit before this. I don't remember. Were we live when
No,
we
we
were
weren't
talking?
live.
No, we
No,
were not
we were
live.
not.
So we talked a little bit about Far Cry and Far Cry 1 and 2 and kind of like their history, and then Far Cry 3 into Blood Dragon, and how they changed up the system and they kind of Ubisoft it. And boy, Far Cry is the game where I picked up 5 and 6. This happened twice, right, to me in the same series, where I picked it up, I played an hour, and I felt that Ubisoft fatigue when I had to climb a tower and do a thing, and all of a sudden I was just like, I've done this for hundreds of hours in Far Cry 3. I did it for hundreds of hours in Far Cry 4.
Yeah.
I am so done with this now. And that would easily be my sort of, I don't know if I could call all of Ubisoft a mechanic.
It's
but
prevalent enough.
It
It's
kind of
prevalent
is. You can say that. I
Yeah.
know what you're talking about.
Ubisoft makes a living off of side content.
Yeah.
Honestly, yeah.
So Ubisoft, boy, Ubisofting, it made me really just put down both of those. I think I maybe got 20 minutes into Far Cry 6 before I was done.
Did you do the thing in Far Cry? I think it's Far Cry 5 where you can just sit in the starting room for like 15 minutes and then the game just ends.
That's in Far Cry 4. And yeah, if you just sit there, then pagan men will come and you can just be done with the game. And I think it's the true ending because it's the only one that's a good ending.
Yeah, and it's the only one that
see.
it's literally you just sit there for 15 minutes and then it does the thing that you came to do and then it rolls credits.
Yep.
I see.
A lot of them have these those weird side endings involving either doing nothing or doing a specific thing at the start of the game, which is maybe the most interesting thing to me about the Ubisoft era Far Cry games.
Yes.
I've never engaged with them because I know how I'll feel, and I have enough of that in every other game.
Well, maybe that's because you've played other Ubisoft games. What's your game?
Speaking of, mine is Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, in that I did everything in that game, and then a week later they announced the sequel that was coming out the following year. And it being an annual series was immediately enough for me to never play it again. So, yeah.
That Ubisoft fatigue, man.
Yeah. Like,
It's real.
I liked 1. I loved 2. I adored Brotherhood. And then as soon as they announced Revelations, I was out. I'm like, nope,
Yep.
I know where this is going. There's 1 annual series that I will consume. Now it's 2. And it was, at the time, Ratchet & Clank, which is no longer annual. And it's Yakuza, where they release 17 of them a year. And
Yeah,
that's
they
it.
really decided to drop 3 in 1 year, huh?
Yeah, they're talking about Kiwami 3 now, which is great.
How about you there, Nico?
So I know folks know me as having been the bastion of finishing and definitely playing a lot of games. No, I'm just kidding. Obviously, but I do tend to finish games that I start. I played The Evil Within 1. I finished it begrudgingly.
Even while people were telling you this game is bad, just stop.
Right. Well, I
And
started
he said,
playing
well,
The
no.
Evil Within 2, and I stopped playing it because I realized that if it's not fully open world, it has open world segments, and you know, there are some games where I like that. Look at Horizon, love those games. But with a game like with a horror game, I want the haunted house experience. I want the linear corridor, designed scares, designed scenarios situation. And that's coming from me as like a horror fan. I think things are better set up when they're guided in that type of a space. And also, I stopped playing Red Dead Redemption 2 because you
never played the game. You never turned that game on.
Yeah. No, you're right. You're correct. I haven't. But because if you don't bathe, the characters aren't nice to you, and because all the things I said earlier, whatever.
I'm excited for him to play it one day and actually really like it or something. Like
it might happen.
That's the
it's
end
not
result
it's
of
a
this.
non-zero chance. Like, I don't have a real opinion on it. I only have this opinion on it.
I remember this is related to The Evil Within. I remember that you were playing so one M. I think Nico had already played one before we started Crub.
Yeah, it must have been 2. Where
it
I
was
like,
2 because he wanted to play
game.
2 because
so you can understand Ghostwire Tokyo.
Before Ghostwire Tokyo, which is a completely different game.
Wow.
Right.
That's
by
what
the
it
same
was.
people, to be fair. By the same people.
Yeah, because I remember he one day out of the blue random posted a link to an article that said that Ghostwire Tokyo was supposed to be Evil Within 3.
Was it? Did I post it? That makes it funnier.
See?
Actually,
this is why I need to play Evil Within 2.
That makes it funnier.
It's a completely different game, Nico. That's not.
It's
That
also
has nothing to
not
do with
worth
anything.
playing. Like, Evil Within 2 is just actively bad.
The first game they made that was good was Hi-Fi Rush.
He did close out that by making by playing Ghostwire Tokyo and doing Naruto hand shooting.
Yeah, I really enjoyed Ghostwire Tokyo, man.
Yeah.
Short game, good game. Evil Within 2. Open world is not necessary in horror.
Yeah. For me, Xenoblade Chronicles X, I mean...
Yeah. Understandably so, for the record.
Like Nico mentioned Demon Souls, and I was like, I guess that's kind of true, because when I beat the boss, I was like, I guess I kind of did it. I didn't feel a need to. I didn't feel a drive to continue.
Boss, I kind of had done it.
Justin's words to me.
The best feeling.
Justin's words to me were, "Yeah, I did it. I don't feel like I need to do any more of it." Basically,
it was like, I understand why people feel achievement when they beat these bosses.
A sense of accomplishment.
Yep, I get it.
Yeah.
I don't need to do it anymore.
Right.
I could
Which,
play another
to be
game.
fair, took quite a long time, if I recall correctly. It took like
you just had to be like, oh, you
time.
can grind, and I was like, oh, you can grind, and then I grinded, and I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Because I was just going and slapped my face at the thing, and you were like, but if you like actually level up, you can be stronger, and I was like, oh, I thought this game was just meant to be an ass.
I mean, to be fair, it is.
It's both.
It is.
Definitely.
Yeah,
it's both.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I'd love to hear from our
Column A.
audience in the comments and on Twitter, maybe. Let us know what you think good side content is. And always, of course, you can tell us in our Discord at crub.org/join, which is
Damn
public.
right you can. It's a great little server with a lot of fun things and...
Going for it. Yeah.
If we're talking about good side content, I didn't even talk about a fishing minigame. The fishing minigame is the best kind of side content.
If a game doesn't have a fishing minigame, it's not Game of the Year. Like, this is always been proven.
I think we can have a whole
Yeah.
Crubcast episode on fishing minigames, if I'm honest with you.
I'm wearing a Big the Cat shirt.
He sure is. And
I'm
folks...
wearing odd brand that's not paying us.
Yo.
Folks, with that, this has been JTAR9. That's been the Golden Bolt. That's been Moriarty. I've been All Hell Buckets. For Crub, we'll see you in the next one.
I'm back!
He's back.
I'm not ending it yet. I want you to feel awkward.
Okay.